Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Today we will talk about a very influential article of Peter Singer, Famine, Affluence and Morality. Now many of when both of you or when you have been doing philosophy, there has been this urge that, well, where does it connect to the world out there? So particularly in ethics, when we have been talking, we've been talking about a lot of moral theories, but where does this connect to the world out there? And this essay is a crucial example of how a philosopher's work in the philosophical domain has influenced the world out there. So it was a very crucial article, and it did get in a lot of funding and resources. And unlike the criticism that, well, many philosophical articles end up in their journals without moving anything in the world. So the context of this article is, well, it was written in 1971. There's a situation, there's famine in East Bengal, or now Bangladesh. There was this formation of Bangladesh, independence from Pakistan, constant poverty, cyclone and civil war. So a sudden high intensity demand on a fledgling government with very limited resources and located in one of the resource starved regions of the world. In no way the author understands the situation to be fatalistic. And so what do others do? What is the crucial point? What others do? Okay. So now before we take on, since we have had a preliminary reading of this article, let us come up with what has been your, how moved have you been with this piece? What difference has it, and what do you think it is, what has been the critique? It is a jolt to the world community, to individuals everywhere, to start donating for this situation that we have in 1971. How would you react to it if this is a situation then and there? How would you react reading this article if you were in 1971? Okay, right. Okay, let's take this situation one on one. Would you like to add something to this? Okay, not now. Now, what a few crucial questions that are being raised by Singer is that, what do the affluent, if at all, owe anything to the lesser affluent or tragedy struck. Now, as philosophy students, what would you think, that is this a question that is relevant, or when asked to a philosopher, or is this just a clarion call, or what do the affluent owe to the lesser affluent or the tragedy struck?
I think we can answer this question by answering another more fundamental question. It can be argued in the light of the political economic history of the world that the affluent people owe their affluence itself to the rest of the world. So, given that fact, now they certainly have a moral duty to utilize their affluence to relieve the suffering of others. So, it's important to recognize the more basic fact.
Okay, interesting. Now, which is not raised by Singer in this article, but if you would like to read into it, that well, Singer takes a starting point. The starting point being that well, there is tragedy in a particular part of the world, and there is affluence in a particular part of the world, and that the affluent, therefore, what is the rationale that goes behind them to donate to the ones who are tragedy struck. Now, interesting. Now, if you trace the genealogy or the history of affluence, one very dominant worldview is that well, the resources in the world are finite, and that is being just distributed in a skewed manner, and therefore it is just a matter of earlier utilization of ancestors, that certain resources have accumulated in one part of the world and thereby causing a scarcity on the other part of the world. Now, to this worldview, there is also a retort that well, affluence is also a result of human effort, and where effort has been more, and where thinking has been cherished, and ways of affluence have been realized, there has simply been much more affluence than in regions which have not exhibited these traits in societies. How would you react to that?
When we are talking about the concept of affluence in the physical output, whatever pattern actually is article is talking about the positive effect on affluence, and he is saying that from the utilitarian standpoint, it has a vital role, because we are maybe giving donate or who are very charity. It is necessary for poor people in that moment, because if someone is giving to a group or a society, that does not mean that the song is there. And I think it can help to us to help others in a bad condition. So there is it is also our sympathy to others, that someone is in bad condition, in that moment we are standing, and he's talking about how the societies have been like talking or maybe some of the condition in that moment. Maybe someone is distant from other places, we can totally relate to them, and he's also talking about the technically how we can do it. But he's saying that it is a government responsibility to solve this technically, and basically the state. And from the morality standpoint, he's talking about the equity, not the equal condition, because we can't give more like money or maybe the equal amount of money to others. So at least we can try for our best to keep the equity condition to everyone.
Okay, but let's tackle one question by one. The first question, that well, your claim is that well, fundamental question being is, what do the rich owe to the poor? Okay, let's have that so that our focus remains on that. The first question that what I would read in as what Singer asks, that well, what do the rich owe to the poor? Now, one view is that well, this notion of owe is actually a notion of repayment, because somehow the affluence has accumulated by starving certain regions of the world, and therefore it is not a moral owing, but actually a almost legal owing, because the affluent have cornered in more of the resources than the less affluent. But what about this is one way of perceiving the world, that where resources are finite, right, because this is in fact almost the border of on economic thinking, that there are two ways of perceiving the economy. One is that the world has a fixed resource economy, and it's only a game of distributing the resources from one region to the other. The other way is that resources or goods can be generated. So, it is not that the net wealth of the world remains the same and it is redistributed, but anyone exhibiting entrepreneurship and knowledge, skills and traits that are valued generates resources and therefore generates affluence. So, we have had one view. What will you agree with it, or you?
Yeah, I think this person can use the concept of power as philanthropy. When you're talking about the CSR or any group, release group, they're not thinking about its own development, they're thinking about the environmental resilience or the welfare of the society. So,
but why should one or the affluent think of the welfare of the society?
because maybe in his personal point of view, he wants to grow his own group, it's like and the second way, when he is staying within a society, he is also one responsibility to pay something.
And what is the basis of that responsibility? Because one view is that the basis of that responsibility is because the affluence has come from starved regions. But what if we hold a worldview that well, everyone has generated their own affluence roughly, and therefore there is no legal owing in that manner? Is there, what is the basis of the moral owe?
I think when we are using the empty one, that means at least we should donate something from our own resource.
But what is the basis of that should? Because what do you hold, that the world order has fixed in resources which is distributed, or we generate our own resources?
Because if you will think, then again it will be difficult for the poor person when someone will be investing. So I think it is dependent upon the people, and it is their responsibility as well as their interest. The most important factor is the interest. If I am a rich man, that does not mean that I will give like one product to
or that you have become rich at the expense of somebody else.
No, when I'm donating something, that does not mean I'm thinking about my like material things. I'm thinking there like it is here. I'm talking about the human value rather than the
True. But what first question we are dealing with is that how did I or how did a nation or a culture or a country become wealthy? They did become by stealing or starving another region of the world, or wealth can be created independent of relative poverty? The second one. Interesting. We have two parallel views here, that of course we need to engage with views, with each of these views, because this will determine whether this rich owe to the poor is either a legal owing or a moral owing. Okay.
giving the priority to the individual. Like individual interest is the most important rather than the general interest. And the later there is also a problem in better for that. He's talking about that universal utilitarian, because he's coming out of the utilitarian thing, and he's thinking that everybody should give a chance to do something, funding or donating or whatever the charity.
All right. Okay, if you take a look at the slide right now, it basically describes the situation that is on that. Well, that particular time, which was that at an individual level people have not responded in the magnitude required. There were some exceptions, of course. At the governmental level, assistance has not come to the massive levels required for sustained assistance, and a comparison of the expenditure of the governments, and that is taken as the indicator of the reflection about their policies. So, if you remember the example of the Concorde, that how the British government spends more on the development of a supersonic jet than the alleviation of suffering. So, these were the relative standards given, but the general questions that are raised, as I see, is that, well, there is almost a perpetual situation of the world where there is suffering and affluence coexisting with not enough transfer of resources taking place. So, there is suffering and there is affluence, both existing at the same time in the same world, but enough transfer of resources not taking place. That is the prick that has made Singer write almost an article in a very aggressive tone. So, and targeted not just to philosophical audience, but to the world at large. And the relatively well resourced prioritize the utilization of their resources, and Singer finds fault with this prioritization, both at the individual and the collective level. So, those who are relatively well resourced, they find a problem. Let us have the slide on. Yes, they have the they find fault with this prioritization, both at the
So I think it's not possible every time, because if you look to India, then the situation is different. If you're talking about the USA or UK, I think they are more active than the suffering, because they are so active that they are trying to eradicate their suffering from the society.
Yes, but when they are talking about the situation of the world, so as a world order, as a world community, as a citizen of the world, you have pockets of affluence, pockets of scarcity, and perhaps the situation has not changed since the time of recorded history. There has always been a almost an extreme existing. So, this difference. So, even for a prosperous first world country, there is also a food starved third world country. So, that is what Singer wants us to reflect, that why is it not triggering the kind of reaction it should trigger, what he expects to be to trigger, that, well, there is affluence and you value your supersonic jet more than the alleviation of poverty. That is where the question arises. So, well, first question, what do the rich owe to the poor? We can find, well, two strains of answers, that one, that they legally owe, and another is that they owe on human grounds, or because they share a common humanity, and it is because our fundamental nature to be touched by the suffering of the other, by catharsis or by whatever means, that we ought to be concerned. Because if you notice, well, Singer starts his article by saying that suffering is an evil, and those who disagree with it, he does not even engage with that. So, in fact, he takes a very rigid applied or in the world tone in this article. He does not enter, or he closes the possibility of discussing about any esoterical or metaphysical claims about why other world, or how starving or death is not really an evil, and there have been many philosophical views about it. This clearly rules it out of this zone of the article. So, when he talks about this fundamental assumption, that I begin with the assumption that suffering and death from the lack of food, shelter and medical care are bad. So, this is I think most people will agree, and he does not bring this into a contextual view. But as philosophy students, what do you think, if you want to contest the claim over here, what would you like to possible reason at all? What would you read into it?
Yeah, he is giving the priority to the basic needs of a human being, that is like food, shelter, and medical care, because basically due to the lack of the medical care,
Yes, but we are just questioning this assumption that for the sake of questioning that this what reads on the first line of the paragraph starting in this page is that I begin with the assumption that suffering and death from the lack of food, shelter and medical care are bad. Well, about the generic assumption that suffering and death from lack of food, shelter and medical care are bad. Is that a bad? That's a moral claim that these are bad.
Well, it assumes that there are resources in the world that can be used to prevent accidents. So, if that is the case, then those who hold those resources or have control over them are obligated to prevent some suffering.
Yes, they are obligated, but I am asking that if somebody wants to question this assumption, or what is how do you debate this assumption, how do you problematize it? What is he denying?
When he is talking about food, shelter and medical care are bad, in the philosophical outlook we can't say that these things are bad, because
He's saying that suffering and death are bad.
I don't think so, because death is like its ultimate reality, we can't change,
Mm-hmm.
and the suffering is dependent upon the individual, how they are controlling their lifestyle, and also it is dependent upon, like, basically suffering is dependent upon like man-made resource.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the death is
Okay.
Now, suffering and death here are not personal. They are
when you're talking about the food, when talking about it, definitely it is my personal point of view, because when I'm talking about the family food, that means we are making the food. Here,
no, but I wouldn't choose not to make food to avoid suffering. If I don't,
What is per se wrong with suffering and death coming from this? Well, okay, let me just briefly put that what he is, perhaps from what I can read that he is denying, is that he engages in no talk about fatalism. That when fatalism claims that, well, and esoteric theories that, well, we all go through necessary, because all religions, this is I would read a very anti-religious view in this claim that he is making, that, well, all suffering that we encounter are not sufferings that we deserve, and death is not a liberation from that suffering. So, he keeps the entire box of such esoteric, metaphysical or religious claims out of the situation. He takes life as finite, and he takes human actions that can make a difference. So, I would read into this as a complete denial of fatalism, that if there is suffering and death from the lack of food and shelter and medical care, they are bad because they are preventable, and they are not the result of my previous or earlier actions, and they are not, definitely not a test for me to overcome.
why is that problematic? And isn't that something to be welcomed?
The standpoint the Singer mentions? Yes, yes, it is to be welcomed. I am just saying what by refusing to argue, which line does he stop arguing. So, when he, because he does not, if you read, he does not deny that there will be any problems with such this assumption, but he does not find it worthwhile. So, I would want to bring to light what are these possible problems. So, perhaps most of us would not agree with it, but there can be exceptions, and these are the kind of exceptions that come out to be.
I have a question.
even on a fatalistic understanding of suffering,
Would one deny that the suffering is bad, or would one simply say that it is bad when we cannot do it?
Okay, now if it's two ways of looking at it. First is the suffering a cause of a prior, the effect of a prior cause, one, and second is human free will granted. So, because if human free will is granted, then one can try to alleviate sufferings, but on the other hand, if human free will is not granted, then it's almost a completely fatalistic order where suffering is inevitable, and it is the result of prior actions. I can see a very strong critique of Indian religious views that occur, which say that, well, whatever is happening is a result of your past actions. So, one is critiquing that, and second, tragedy or famine, affluence and natural disasters and man-made problems, why do they occur in certain part of the world and not in the other part of the world, or why is the basis of affluence is not chance, the basis of affluence is effort. So, it is a very positivistic reading of the world order, that well implicitly if I read into it is that the world order, the way it is, the division between affluence and poverty is not random, it is a result of human action, and thereof. So, just as fatalism, there is bad fate, there can be good fate. So, either way. So, what the resources have implicitly the prosperous have implicitly comes from their own efforts, and the tragedies that are faced are also to be sorted by the world community at large. Okay. So, let us
Do we have a clear way to reconciling the two views that we discussed earlier about resources and governance? If we say that affluence is a result of human action, it's not a matter of chance, then on both the views, it's not only on the second view that affluence is generated by personal activity. You can say the same thing on the first view.
yes.
And there's another thing I wanted to bring up. When we say that the resources are limited, and then the second, when we say that the resources are not limited, but that new resources can be generated, I think we're talking about two different sorts of resources. I think it can be said of natural resources, most of the natural resources that they are limited, but the kind of resources that are not limited that can be generated are, I think it's primarily wealth. You can exploit natural resources in different ways to create new wealth. So, it's that we're talking about two different sorts of resources, one is two different views.
One being natural resources, and what would you like to term the other? Wealth. Okay. Well, I don't, of course, Singer does not make any exclusive claim about it, but if I am to read into it, well, he is perhaps not making such a clear distinction. He is in fact finding one leading to the other. So, perhaps natural resources and wealth are tied up, but then perhaps that is from my reading of Peter's or Singer's other works. From this particular work, I think we cannot draw any claim about what he is trying to put forth.
It doesn't, I mean, when you first presented these two views, they seem to be completely distinct from each other. But now it seems that they can be united into a more complex view of resources and wealth. We can say that there are some limited resources to be shared by all, but that some more enterprising individuals and societies acquire greater control over those resources, and that results in their generating greater wealth.
Okay.
So that is the reason for this great divide between wealthy.
Okay. But of course, there are exceptions where affluence has been attained over places and cultures which are very scarcely blessed with natural resources. So, that can of course be seen that it is continuous, but in certain cases and certain places blessed with natural resources are still not affluent enough. But anyway, I think for the purpose of this article, because he makes no implicit claim about it in this article, we can let it be for the time being and get into what debatable claims or what problematic claims are made in this article. So, if you take a look at this slide about assumptions, well, the first one we just talked about, and these seem to be very intuitively binding claims, but let us see how and why these are binding and why do they not translate into action. So, if you look at the second assumption that is listed, that well, if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought morally to do it. This is a clearly absolutely a utilitarian claim, that well, if we can prevent something, in fact prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance. So, there is a kind of a moral calculus here. I give you some time to go through it.
This is the stronger version of this thesis.
Yes, also a mild version of his thesis. Yes.
And he argues that even the milder version
Yes. Okay, can we proceed? Okay, right. So, well, what's the problem here? The problem, when you see Singer makes this claim that well, this seems to be very intuitively obvious and probably most of us would agree to it, but why this supposedly obvious claim does not bring an action. So, when we talk about that, well, if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought morally to do it. So, this is the moral calculus that the utilitarian talks about it. So, talk about that if you weigh the positive good, that the goods that come out of a decision, and if it outweighs the suffering or evil or that comes out of it, then you choose an action that brings about overall happiness over suffering. So, that is the generic principle, of which this is a version where it talks about preventing something bad from happening instead of generating happiness. So, when it says that well, when Singer says that well, to prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything. So, this is where the moral calculus is. So, because when you are transferring resources, there is a scarcity that you are voluntarily embracing, and that anything should be of comparable moral importance, and therefore, we ought morally to do it. This is perhaps the principle that he talks about initially. Now, would we find this principle again appeals, but it implies great changes if applied. So, what are these changes? First, these changes are changes of proximity, that the factor of proximity, that if suffering or takes place both physically close to me or to a person closely related to me, then it should not make a difference in my judgment. So, my proximity to a person or the suffering, whether it is spatial proximity or relational proximity, will not make a difference on my effort or on an individual's or an agent's effort to alleviate that suffering. Now, let us look at this first little consequence of a very almost an obvious principle, that proximity is irrelevant. How irrelevant is proximity? Now, there are various examples if you look into the world out there. Let us say beggars. Now, if a beggar comes to you and asks for alms, depending on the state of the beggar, he gets or does not get the alms, or however whatever you decide to do. Now, you know that there is similar scarcity and problems in other parts of the world or other parts of the place you live in, but perhaps most of us do not make an active effort to contribute. Now, if we agree, let us have the slide please. If we agree at the principle that Singer is putting forth, why do we find that in application proximity should not matter, but perhaps does matter? Let's have views on this. Proximity for anything, that how much you would support for suffering family member and to a stranger. Is there some error in the principle, or is there something which the hidden component of the principle that is not palatable with the way human beings work?
There's no error in what
Mm-hmm.
because I'm neutral in this case because I think both are necessary when you are talking about the spatial relation relation to living someone, and because I am very close with someone, so I know about his or her, so I'm giving a donating. But the second thing, when I'm talking about the natural disaster or something, I'm giving because of social responsibility, it's my own responsibility to understand Indian society, it is a civil duty. And when talking about that there is not necessary for proximity, I think it is not applicable much because when I'm talking about a country, generally if India is connected with some other country, if something is happening in that country, then it's trying to give more sufficient resources to them. So in this case, we need outside physical proximity. So both is necessary.
So perhaps human decision making does factor in proximity, but should it? Yes, but that is the whole question, that well, in the same city or town you have very affluent pockets and we have very poor pockets. So penury and affluence simultaneously existing, and no matter how much distance there be. So when you talk about neutrality, what Singer is asking is that there should be absolute neutrality. So you are neutral to the sufferings of not only people proximate or places proximate to you, but also places which are far away, both spatially and relationally to you. So why does the common attitude that well, a suffering in my region I will contribute more, and a suffering in somewhere else in the world perhaps I will contribute less, if not nothing?
Because of attachment, because human being is that attachment, and we can deny that while we are giving. For an example of if he is interested in some particular places, then he is trying for us to give some resources or maybe food resources to that particular place. If he is not interested to give some other place, it's dependent on the farm.
So would Singer call that moral or immoral? He would call it immoral. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
I think the reason why proximity does play such an important role in our lives in shaping our moral action is that when we invest in proximate people, the result we bring about has implications for us. So if we help a person who is related to us or
Who is proximate to us?
if we help someone who is proximate to us in some way, they would probably return the favor to us. That could be one of the considerations. Whereas if we help someone who is really far from us, we would bring about a change in their lives, but it would be done very impersonally in a sense, and that person would not know us, and so our action towards them may not generate a counter action that's beneficial to us. So as psychological beings, we invest ourselves through our actions in other people and expect that investment to bring some returns.
Okay. So in fact, I see this as Singer's paradigmatic following of the Kantian paradigm, that where neutrality, even to the point that you hold a known person at par with an unknown person, and you just value the suffering that is to be alleviated and not whose suffering. So that
Very demanding. It sounds very fine and good, but at the end of the we have to consider whether it's practical.
Hmm.
He in fact mentions this as an objection, which he then rejects, that if we make the moral standards too exacting, then that may result in people not complying with them at all. But it does have some merit. We cannot make the standards too high. They don't result in any, that they don't translate into action.
That's correct. Okay, that's an interesting observation brought about, that well, the principle may appeal to us rationally, but being psychological animals, proximity cannot be underestimated. So, we are bound to have neutrality is almost a mechanistic notion, whereas we are psychological beings and proximity does matter to us. In fact, if you look at the entire domain of seeking charity and campaigning for charity, we try to put hard hitting images that will elicit some response from the viewer. It is whereas text describing the detail of the situation will not elicit that kind of a response. So, we put in hard hitting images that will bring about or elicit in that some kind of a psychological connect with the potential donor to bring out a donation. So, here Singer is not taking into account the psychological characters or tendencies.
Sometime back, I read a very interesting article that they had in some relevance to our discussion. This article argued quite convincingly that the emotions of care and love and the ones that drive us to take an interest in other people and work for them have a biological basis in us. So when we feel the emotion of care or concern for someone, certain biological processes go on inside our body, and they create that emotion in us. It's not possible for the body to go through those processes all the time for everyone. So even biologically speaking, we cannot be expected to love everyone all the time.
Okay, interesting. That's a very in fact a powerful trend in explaining human behavior by the biology we are based on. So, even evolutionary ethics, for that matter, survival ethics, all tend to seek a biological explanation for our behavior. But that's interesting. For the years spent together, will that not nullify our neutrality for a person with whom we have spent years together or known for a long time versus a person whom we do not know? So, we want to be rationally, we want to be people who alleviate suffering depending on the quantum of suffering, but psychologically we value or we are more concerned or hurt by the suffering of proximate people than people whom we are not proximate with. An essential factor that perhaps Singer is not of course may be aware of, but is missing out in what is the claim of this article. But perhaps Singer's answer to this would be that this is exactly what we need to overcome if we want to have a better world order. So, anything more on proximity that you would like to add?
I think this becomes a real problem only on the second view, which tells us that we only have a moral obligation to alleviate the suffering in others. If we see it also as a legal obligation, then irrespective of whether we want psychologically and emotionally to help, we are bound to help because we legally acknowledge that. We owe our affluence at least at large to others.
Okay. That yes, that if we owe our affluence to others and therefore we owe support in the times of need, then it is yes, connected or not, and that further nullifies, makes it almost a legal requirement. Yes, that it makes it need not even go to the level of the moral call, but it goes to the level of a simple quid pro quo legal call, that well, it is like an employer looking into the health benefits of an employee. Would you like to see that as
But I wouldn't say it's a simple legal call. I would say that it's a legal call based in morality. In fact, it's the moral owing that's simply wrong, because it comes from the sense of all of us being members of the same human group. But when the sense of owing is legal, it's the legal aspect comes in addition to the moral aspect, and that moral aspect is that also is different from the moral going in the second view, because it's not, they're not morally obligated to help because they are humans like us, but because they have taken something.
okay. It's not simply legal. Okay, it also has a pervading moral basis, but it is not restricted to being a moral call only. Okay, it's is to be legal also. You would like to opine? Huh?
Even those matters that it is talking about the proximity is not suitable, people do the illness and other. If we look the Indian argue that the concept of Islam, we are not thinking about the consequence. I think that concept is applicable also in this case. When we talk about the proximity, we never think about what will be like in future as we keep saying. And also it is like a universal welfare. So they are looking about. So we are thinking about the welfare of
The world as one community. Okay, interesting, because this also raises the whole question of why do governments give aids? Why do world bodies give aids? So there is so much of world aid taking place. Now there have been various readings of why should any country or government or collective aid another. So it can be both at the level of nations, it can be at the level of societies, at families, at individuals, at country levels. Why does one assist the other?
and it clears also the universality or the universality
So does its call come from we being the citizens of a common world, or perhaps it comes from common human nature, or it comes from a sense of owing that
it's a human nature. You can say it's a common world, because when you're talking about the human nature, again it has differences from the psychological standpoint or biological standpoint. But I think the basic of common one, you can say proximity, we have to avoid both this way. Because basically he trying to create intimate relation between two countries or more than that, and he's trying to like universality is the most important in this paper, and he's saying that maybe I know or I don't know, that does not matter. I'm thinking about only the welfare of the society. This is the motto of this family.
in fact not just society, well he would be calling humanity per se, because if you look at the second little implication that comes from Singer's principle, that the actions assumed or actual of others similarly placed ought not to make a difference to one's actions. So that is again a call for impersonal or neutrality, that well if there is a problem, and the example that he talks about, that suppose there is a child drowning in a pond. Now if you are the only one passing through, that makes does that increase your obligation when compared to their people, various people passing by the pond? You have the same, but again what would you opine on it? That according to Singer, that this others similarly placed should not affect your decision making. So but as modern behavioral economists would try to bring forth, that what you choose is essentially influenced by what others in your by how many people are there around you, and how many people, what choices they make, and that crucially influences you. So, Singer's demand that, well, there is something that we negate the others around us in making a choice. Is it almost an inhuman claim?
No, I think he's right, because there's awareness in problem. At least we have to prove that at least my best I have to say. But others are thinking, I'm thinking later, because if I'm not said in that moment, maybe something will happen. And this is like I can't judge myself that if something will happen.
Okay.
So later I can think, because when you're talking about the second fact, it is depends on the time, or it's up to you to decide it later. The first fact is the most necessary, or it is an essential factor that you have to take the decision in your own way, because you have three choices and you see your use that features in that. I think that's why, because whenever he's giving this example, I think it's like this.
Yes, go ahead.
I think this is where fixed moral rules and principles enter the picture. There is some moral principle that says that somebody is drowning, they ought to try to save them. And the character or implications of that principle are independent of what is happening around us. It's independent of contingent factors.
So, contingent factors should not play a role.
At least in this instance, it seems that it should not. So there is something to be said for fixed moral principles. Yeah, he's not thinking in this example, he's also thinking that if I think that he will say, and someone is thinking that he will say, then who will say that person. So within that moment, maybe he will be. Or there may be situations where people don't even have that expectation of each other. They may all collectively feel that whatever is happening is I mean, not even in those situations, it's only the presence and acceptance of fixed moral principles that tell people to do otherwise.
Okay, so the very claim that he makes is that numbers lessen obligation. I think that's how he puts it over here, that do numbers actually lessen obligation?
I think he argues to show that if many people act, then the extent of your obligation does get reduced. So if many people assist in relation
Or whatever problem there is.
then the amount that each one has to contribute is reduced.
Okay.
But it doesn't affect the obligation per se.
Okay.